Hello, everybody. All right, welcome to the Mikestand. Um, today is Thursday, September the 25th, 2025. I'm gonna give people a chance to come in before we get started, of course. Um, if you haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the question to the best of my ability. So finished off, of course, looking back over the April 1941 cartoons. Um, Saw Color Rhapsody from Columbia Pictures. Saw a couple of Warner Brothers stuff. So, hmm. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. Let's try this little trick one more time here. Maybe we did just a tad too early. Alright, so anyways, I think we're at 2:31 right now. About 30 seconds more. Again, a friendly reminder to everybody, if you guys haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. Alrighty then, let's see. And they're being real stingy today, aren't they? Alrighty then. So, anyways. Alright, well, anyway, so here's what's on tap for tonight. We are. Actually, let me try one more. Yeah, I'll be right back. I'm gonna put some music on for you guys while I'm gone. Just gonna go off. Oh, there we go. Never mind. All right. So with all that being said, of course. All right. So here's what's on tap for tonight. We're going to go ahead. I've got kind of a profile piece planned for tonight. There wasn't a whole lot of news going on. Hey, just a lot of the same stuff you've been hearing about lately. So we're going to look back up through their peak years, of course. Look back on the history of Terry Toons a bit. You know, Terry Toons is a company that gave us, of course, Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Farmer Alfalfa, Candy Goose, Dinky Duck, among others. we'll look back at that, and then of course we'll have the wrestling wrap up. Get caught up on last night's Dynamite. Look ahead to tonight's Impact and Ring of Honor shows, and then we will of course also we might touch upon tomorrow. Well, we'll probably touch upon that more tomorrow night with Victory Road, which is tomorrow night. Then we'll wrap things up with this day in each history. So with all that being said, why don't we go ahead and get started then? Let me just go ahead and, as I said, we're going to go ahead and look at the history of Terry Tunes. Terry Tunes, of course, a company founded by Paul Terry. And we're going to basically just go up through like the peak years, as it were, for our purposes here. So here we go. Terry Tunes Incorporated was an American animation studio headquartered in New Rochelle, New York, which was active from 1929 until its closure on December 29, 1972, in parentheses here, and briefly returned between 1987 and 1996 for television in name only, on parentheses. Founded by Paul Terry, Frank Moser, and Joseph Kaufman, it operated out of the, in parentheses, K building in downtown New Rochelle. The studio created many cartoon characters, including Fanny Zilch, which was their answer to Betty Boop of the time, Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Gandy Goose, Sourpuss, Ubbus the cat, Dinky Duck, Little Roquefort, the Terry Bears, Dimwit, and Luno. Terry's pre-existing character, Farmer Alfalfa, was also featured often in the series. Well, let me go over here real quick. So here's the logo, and then Industry Animation, predecessor Van Buren Studios, founded 1929 and active for 96 years. 96 years ago today. Founders, of course, just read them. Defunct on December 29, 1972, 52 years ago. So it was active for 47 years there. Of course, the successors were CBS Animation Productions, Paramount Library, and all the, basically they were based out of New York for the most part. All right, so let's get back to the article here. So the new Terry Tunes period of the late 1950s through the mid 1960s produced new characters such as Clip Cobbler or Clobber, Tom Terrific, Deputy Dog, Hector Heathcote, Hashimoto-san, Sidney the Elephant, Possible Possum, James Hound, Astronut, Sad Cat, The Mighty Heroes, and Sally Sargent. Also during that time, Ralph Bakshi got his start as an animator and eventually as a director at Terry Tunes. Terry Tunes shorts were originally released to theaters by 20th Century Fox from 1935 until 1973. After Terry had retired, Terry Tunes was sold to CBS, which would later purchase the entire library. Paramount Pictures would eventually take theatrical rights ownership of the Terry Tunes library in 1994, which was already purchased by Viacom, and would purchase CBS in 2000. As of 2019, Paramount Pictures has owned the rights to the studio and the library after the remerger of CBS Corporation and Viacom. So here's the history. We'll start, of course, with the pre-Terry Tunes era and then go through the peak years era. Let's see if anybody... And again, if you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. That being said, let's get to this. So let's continue on. Article here. Pre-Terry Toons era. Terry first worked for Bray Studios in 1916, where he created the Farmer Alfalfa series. He would then make a Farmer Alfalfa short for Edison Pictures called, quote, Farmer Alfalfa's Wayward Pup, unquote, in 1917. This is, of course, still during the silent film era, as it were, and some later cartoons were made for Paramount Pictures. Around 1921, Terry founded the Fables Animation Studio, named for its Aesop Film Fables series, in conjunction with the studio of Amédée J. Van Buren. Fables churned out a Fable cartoon every week for 8 years in the 1920s. That was something that Paul Terry was known for throughout his whole career. He just had this saying, a lot of his stuff was considered lower quality, but he was doing more of it. Like, whereas a lot of studios, by the time we get to the 1930s and 40s, they were churning out usually 1 to 2 shorts a month. He was well, I guess in some ways, he was doing stuff every other week. I guess if it's 2 times a month for most. Let's see now. In 1928, Van Buren, anxious to compete with the new phenomenon of talking pictures, released Terry's Dinner Time, released October 1928. Van Buren then urged Terry to start producing actual sound films. Now, granted, here's the thing. Here's the thing that was recently revealed too, and I remember looking into this. So for a long time, it was believed that Steamboat Willie, the Mickey Mouse cartoon, Steamboat Willie, was the first sound cartoon to be released. But it was in recent years. It's been noted that it was actually Dinner Time from Van Buren Studios. That was actually the first sound cartoon release. Let's see. Instead of post-synchronizing the cartoons, Terry refused, and Van Buren fired him in 1929. Almost immediately, Terry and much of his staff started up the Terrytoon studio near his former studio. One staff member during that time was Art Babbitt, who went on to become a well-known Disney animator. The peak era. Through much of its history, the studio was considered one of the lowest quality houses in the field, to the point where Paul Terry noted, quote, "Let Walt Disney be the Tiffany's of the business. I want to be the Woodwards." I guess what that meant was if the Tiffany's was basically producing stuff for, let's say, the elites, the upper, the high class people, then the Woodworth is the one that was doing like more the middle class people. I need to go off camera here for a moment. I'll be right back, but I'll put some music on to entertain you guys while I'm gone. All right, I'm back. So, anyways, so getting back to the article here. So, yeah, so basically Terry was looking more to produce more stuff for more of the people, I guess, than you know. That's why he said what he said there. Terry's studio had the lowest budgets, was among the slowest to adapt to new technologies such as sound in about 1930 and Technicolor in 1938. With its graphic style, while its graphic style remained remarkably static for decades, it actually followed the sound cartoon trend of the late 1920s, early 1930s very quickly. Background music was entrusted to one man, Philip Shilb, or yeah, Philip Sheeb. And Terry's refusal to pay royalties for popular songs forced Sheeb to compose his own scores. Yeah, some people might argue that Paul. Well, okay, depending on which side of the argument, some people might say Terry's frugal. Some people might say Terry was cheap. It depends upon how you look at it, right? You know, so um, that's probably yeah. He outlasted in terms of business wise. He seemed to outlast a few other notable people who would actually have um, financial difficulties, including, of course, Charles Mintz, who passed away in 1939 from a heart attack. The Fleischer brothers, who were basically bought out by Paramount in, like, I believe it was like 1942. Um, so so maybe being frugal had its points there. Paul Terry took pride in producing a new cartoon every other week, regardless of the quality of the films. Until 1957, screen credits were very, very sparse, listing only the writer until 1950, solely John Foster, then Tom Morrison thereafter. Director, Terry's three main directors were Connie Rosinski, and I believe Connie was short for Conrad. That, I believe, was a guy. Eddie Donnelly and Manny Davis, and musical director Philip A. Sheeb. Terry Toon's first distributor was Educational Pictures, specialist in short subject comedies and novelties, audio cinema. In the early 1930s, backed the production of Terrytoons and distributed the Educational Library internationally, except in the United Kingdom and Ireland, where the library was distributed by Educational and Gaumont British in partnership with Ideal Film Company. Let's see, the Fox Film Company, later known as 20th Century, today known as 20th Century Fox, I believe, then released educational shorts to theaters in the 1930s, giving the Terrytoons wide exposure. Following the merger between Fox Film and 20th Century, the newly formed 20th Century Fox withdrew support from Educational Pictures, and the company both backed and distributed Terrytoons. Farmer Alfalfa was Terry's most familiar character in the 1930s. Of course, this would be before he introduced everybody to Mickey Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll in the 40s, mind you. Kiko the Kangaroo was spun off from Farmer Alfalfa. Yeah, there were a couple of series, Kiko the Kangaroo and Putty the Pup. In fact, both of those were spun off from the Farmer Alfalfa. Most of the other cartoons featured stock generic animal characters in design, one of which was a scruffy dog with a black patch around one eye, known as Putty the Pup, who was also featured in some of the Farmer Alfalfa cartoons. Terry ultimately built a series around this character, now known as Putty the Pup. Now, granted, Putty the Pup produced like 13 shorts from what I read. and probably had one of the longest gaps between his last two shorts. His 12th short was done towards the end of 1938, and then his last short, to be produced for the Putty the Pup series, was done in 19. So almost like 4 years, basically. 4 years, four and a half years between shorts, between being featured. See, Paul Terry. All right, I'm sorry. Paul Terry may have realized that Educational was in financial trouble because he found another lucrative outlet for its product. In 1938, he arranged to release his older cartoons through home movie distributor Castle Films. Educational went out of business within the year, but 20th Century Fox continued to release Terry Toons to theaters the next 2 decades. With a new emphasis on star characters. So basically in the 30s and early 40s, a lot of the characters we talked about here would come out every so often, but they weren't like there was not necessarily series dedicated to them until much later. Terry Toons would just churn out stuff and whatever they felt like putting out at the time. Terry Toons featured the adventures of Super Mouse, later renamed Mighty Mouse, the Talking Magpies Heckle and Jekyll, Silly Gandy Goose, Dinky Duck, Mischievous Mouse Little Roquefort, and the Terry Bears. Despite the artistic drawbacks imposed by Terry's inflexible business policies, Terry Toons was nominated 4 times for an Academy Award for Animated Short Film, All Out for V in 1942, My Boy Johnny in 1944, Mighty Mouse in Gypsy Life in 1945, and Sydney's Family Tree in 1958. All right, so we got up through so now I think, we'll probably continue on here we'll just continue on because I think we're still pretty good on time, right? I was just going to go through the peak years because I didn't know how long but we might just complete the thing. We might just finish everything off. Yeah, we're good on time. All right, so changing hands. The studio was sold outright by the retiring Paul Terry to CBS in 1955, but 20th Century Fox continued distribution. The deal closed the following year in 1956, and it became a division of CBS Film subsidiary. Later, in 1957, CBS put it under the management of UPA alum Gene Deitch, who had to work with even lower budgets. Deitch's most notable works at the studio were the Tom Terrific cartoon segments for the Captain Kangaroo television show. He also introduced a number of new characters such as Sidney the Elephant, Gaston Le Crayon, John Doormat, and Clint Clobber. I wonder if Clint Clobber ever came across the thing before. It's clobber time! Before Deitch was fired in 1959, now Deitch would, of course, go on to work for MGM in the 60s, most notably, doing some of the Tom and Jerry cartoons that were produced actually in Czechoslovakia. But anyways, before Deitch was fired in 1959, Bill Weiss took complete control of the studio. Under his supervision, Heckle and Jekyll and Mighty Mouse went back into production. Besides the 3 core directors of the Terry era, who were still involved as animators and directors, 2 famous studio stalwarts joined the crew: Dave Tendler, Dave Tendler and Martin Terrace. Other new theatrical cartoon series included Hector Heathcote, Nono Hashimoto-san. A lot of these that were coming out in the 50s, of course, they were doing more for television, as TV was really starting to get going there in the 50s as people come home from World War II and were starting to raise families. This was leading into that baby boomer generation. The studio also began producing the Deputy Dog series for television in 1959. Another television production for the Captain Kangaroo show was The Adventures of Larry and Sam, which was written in part by Gene Wood, who would later become the announcer for several game shows, including Family Feud. So that's an interesting little thing. Gene Wood, who's known more as a game show announcer, would actually do some animation writing. Phil Sheeb um, continued as the studio's musical director through the mid 1960s, when he was replaced by Jim Timmons and Elliot Lawrence. The best-known talent at Terrytoons in the 1960s was animator, director, producer Ralph Bakshi, who started with Terrytoons in the 1950s as an opaquer, and eventually helmed the Mighty Heroes series. Bakshi left Terrytoons in 1967 for Paramount's own cartoon studio, which closed its cartoon unit later that year. He would later go on to produce Mighty Mouse and New Adventures for television in 1987. Yes, and in fact, I think Ralph Bakshi did start up his own kind of animated television production company, which was also produced by future Ren and Stimpy creator John Kricfalusi. And if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. With that, let's go ahead and continue on with the article here. Let's see. Closure. After the departure of Ralph Bakshi, the studio petered out and finally closed in 1973. As a result of the FCC banning TV networks from owning cable television and syndication of television programs. CBS created Viacom Enterprises to handle all network programs beyond TV production and network broadcasting. On July 4th, 1971, Viacom Enterprises spun off from CBS. Neither Viacom Enterprises nor CBS had any interest in Terrytoons. The Terrytoons Film Library was still regularly re-released to theaters by Fox. The studio's one of the last short was an unsold TV pilot called Sally Sargent, about a 16-year-old girl who was a secret agent. Soon after Sally Sargent was complete, Viacom International ended their relationship with Fox and the re-releases ceased. Terrytoons' existence soon came to an end. Art Bartish, who kept the studio running after Bakshi left, would soon die along Connie Rosinski and Bob Kuwahara. Now, Bob Kuwahara, I think, also did some work for I think he did some work for Hanna-Barbera as well throughout portions of his career. Reducing the studio to a ghost studio with executive producer Bill Weiss and story supervisor Tom Morrison, Viacom kept the studio open until 1972. By October of 1972, Viacom International announced that Terrytoons would leave New Rochelle and relocate to Viacom International's office in New York City. On December 29th, Viacom sold the now abandoned New Rochelle studio, and the company's fate was forever sealed. Basically, the Terrytoons studio was essentially absorbed into CBS television production. Post history. Post history here. Weiss continued Terry Toons production from his New York City office with the 1970s Terry Toons cartoons, in parentheses, especially Mighty Mouse and Deputy Dog, being syndicated to many local TV markets. And they were a staple of after-school and Saturday morning cartoon shows for over 3 decades, from the 1950s to the 1980s, until the television rights to the library were acquired by USA Network in 1989. However, any new cartoons and studio stars came from other studios. I need to go off camera here for a moment. I'll be right back. But a little note before I do go off camera here. Of course, I remember some of the like particular Mighty Mouse cartoons growing up. They're pretty cool to watch. So, anyways, let me put on some music here, and then I'll be right back. All right, now back to the article, of course. All right, post history. Okay, so yeah. Okay, in the late 1970s, Filmation Associates licensed the rights to make Mighty Mouse and Heckle. Of course, Filmation gave us, of course, the Justice League cartoons of the DC Comics based cartoons of the late 60s. Adventures of Superman, the New Adventures of Superboy, the Superman Batman Adventure Hour, the Superman Aquaman Hour. They also gave us in the 80s, they gave us He-Man and She-Ra, as well as Black Star and Brave Star. So, and the new Ghostbusters in 1986, and then the live action version back in 1975. So the series was the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, which aired from 1979 to 1980 on CBS. Akishi would later produce Mighty Mouse and New Adventures in 1987, which lasted for 2 seasons. Bakishi and his friend John Kricfalusi inspired the staff to try to get as much Jim Tyre style drawing in the show as possible. Tyre, a standout Terry animator of the original cartoons, with a unique style, became a strong influence on the artist of the Bakshi series, such as now recognizable writers, artists, and animators Bruce Timm, who of course gave us the DCAU, Doug Mensch, let's see, Andrew Stanton, Rich Moore, Lynn Naylor, Jim Reardon, Tom Minton, and Bob Jock. Many of the cartoons, in parentheses, such as Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Dinky Duck, Debbie Dog, and others, in parentheses, were slated to make cameos in the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but only Oscar the Timid Pig, Louie Lion, and a character resembling Gandhi Goose appeared. They can all be seen during the film's finale. They were also planned to appear in the deleted scene of Marvin Acme's funeral. In 1994, Fox would sell its Terry Toons theatrical distribution to Paramount, which was then purchased by Viacom that same year, and would go on to purchase CBS 6 years later in 2000. Let's see if it's saying anything here. Right. So anyways. However, through the years that have followed since the last Terry Toons TV series material in 1988, the rights have been scattered as a result of prior rights issues and corporate changes involving Viacom and CBS, especially in 2005, since CBS Corporation remerged with Viacom to form Viacom CBS, parentheses, Paramount Skydance Corporation as of August 2025, so last month. Reuniting CBS for Paramount on December 4th, 2019, and CBS Films was folded into CBS Entertainment Group after releasing Jexseed on the same day. Paramount Pictures now owns the theatrical distribution on behalf of Paramount Animation and CBS Entertainment Group, while CBS Media Ventures, formed in 2006, owns the television distribution on behalf of CBS iAnimation Productions to the Terry Toons film library. However, some Terry Toons shorts are believed in public domain and have either been issued on low-budget VHS tapes, DVDs, or have been updated on sites uploaded on sites such as Internet Archive. On January 25th, January 5th, 2010, first official release of any Terry Toons material by CBS DVD was issued in the form of the complete series of Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures. In 1999, Nickelodeon attempted to revive the Terry Toons characters as part of the TV series called Curbside. Curbside would have been a parody of a late-night talk show, parody of late-night talk shows with Heckle and Jekyll serving as hosts of the show, along with their assistant, Dinky Duck, and would have featured new cartoons featuring Terry Toon characters like W. Dog, Sydney the Elephant, and Mighty Mouse. So Curbside, I guess Curbside was CBS's attempted answer to Warner Brothers Space Ghost Coast to Coast, right? Who was doing basically the same thing there. Curbside features the talented voices of Toby Huss and Bobcat Goldthwait as Heckle and Jekyll, D. Bradley Baker as Dinky Duck, Mighty Mouse and Sydney the Elephant. All right, Dinky Duck, Mighty Mouse, and Sydney the Elephant. Billy West as Deputy Dog, Haley Joel Osment as Tom Terrific, and additional voices of Baker, West, Charlie Adler, and Rob Paulson. However, it was never picked up, making it the only Terry Toons show that was never officially released. Between 2001 and 2002, the Terry Toons characters returned television in original commercials for Brazilian blue cheese, for what is now America's dairy farmers, parentheses, and fine wine. One such infamous commercial was the Mighty Mouse ad entitled, quote unquote, Dining with Cheese. Dining calmly on cheese in a restaurant, utterly unconcerned with a scene of chaos and terror visibly unfolding in the street outside. Oh boy. That said commercial was then pulled from airing following the September 11th attacks. In 2004, a supposed live-action animated hybrid Mighty Mouse film adaptation was announced for Nickelodeon Movies and Paramount Pictures, with Steve Odekirk of Omation Animation Studios to produce and direct. It was canceled and has been in development hell since then. However, development later revived in April 2019 for Paramount Animation with John and Elric Heber to write the screenplay, and both Karen Rosenfeld and Robert C. Court to produce. It was later announced that in November 2024, Paramount Animation was associated with Maximum Effort with co-founder Ryan Reynolds and a producer and Matt Lieberman as a writer. Okay, so that's all we're going to do on that one for now. Just go into like how Terry Toons did branch out in the comic books, but I think we spent enough time on this, as it were. So, anyways, I hope you guys found that informative and enjoyable to listen to. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the wrestling wrap-up. As, of course, we got some news. Of course, going to look back to last night's AEW. Then look ahead to, of course, tonight's Impact and Ring of Honor. As, of course, Impact, TNA is continuing to prepare for tomorrow night's, Victory Road pay-per-view. I'm just waiting for the signal thing to... All right. Okay, so let me find first of the... So, of course, this episode of Dynamite coming off this past Saturday's, All Out pay-per-view from Toronto, from Scotiabank Arena in Toronto. So this, last night's AEW came from the Peterson Event Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And throughout most of the night on commentary, you had Bryan Danielson, Excalibur, and Taz. And then at different points in the night, Ricochet and Don Callis would guest on. So the opening match of the evening saw a match for the AEW World Tag Team titles as Brodito coming off of their victory at All Out, and retain the AEW World Tag Team titles over the Gates of Agony of the Demand. Of course, you had Ricochet on commentary after, of course, the end of the match saw basically Ricochet get ejected when he tried to interfere as Aubrey Edwards the referee Aubrey Edwards was distracted trying to see if Brody King was okay after he had been thrown into a table over the guardrail by Toa Leona, which would eventually lead to Bandito hitting the 21 plex on Bishop Khan. Hangman Adam Page would retain the AEW World Title over Ring of Honor Pure Champion Lee Moriarty. Then you had in a 6-man tag contest, you had the conglomeration of Hologram, Mark Briscoe, and Orange Cassidy making his return after being out for a while injured, taking on the Don Callis family's Hechicero, AW Unified Champion Kazuchika Okada, and former international champion and current G1 Climax champion Konosuke Takeshita. They defeated. Now, prior to the match, of course, Orange Cassidy made his return by basically defacing a portrait, I guess, of Don Callis, which led to some heat here. Don Callis, of course, would be on commentary for this match. Cassidy hitting the orange punch on Hechicero, I believe, and then of course Hologram getting the win with the portal bomb on Hechicero. Claudio Castagnoli defeated Powerhouse Hobbs in a one-on-one match as both Pac who made his return from injury this past Saturday, and Samoa Joe would eventually get involved, as John Moxley also came out to try to get involved, only for them to be, well, actually no, that came a little later, sorry. So Claudia Castagnoli got the win on, and in the main event saw Chris Statlander retain her recently won AEW Women's World Title against Mina Shirakawa. It was actually probably the best match, in my opinion, the best match of the night. And we finally got an answer as to whether or not Chris Statlander would join. They'd been teasing this for the last month about the possibility of Chris Statlander maybe joining the Death Riders. She basically backfisted Wheeler Yuta, then got in John Moxley's face, and then ran off and basically told the Death Riders what they could do with themselves, basically, in her actions there. And then, of course, then we see Darby Allin come out with a flamethrower, looking to confront John Moxley. Now, some other big announcements that came out of the event, some other major happenings, of course. Apparently, FTR attacked Beth Copeland, which of course, led to Cope feeling that he may need to take a break from wrestling, tend to his wife, only for Will Nightingale to confront FTR and Stokely Hathaway, and then Willow Nightingale giving Stokely a good slap upside the head for his trouble. It was also announced by Tony Khan that they added a new title to AEW, as there will now be a women's tag team title. So now they're now bringing in a women's tag team title into the company. So now let's look ahead to tonight's action. Both Ring of Honor and TNA Impact to look at. So on tonight's Ring of Honor Club, coming from the 2300 Arena in Philadelphia, PA, with Caprice Coleman and Ian Riccaboni on commentary. seeing a pure rules match, Deonna Purrazzo taking on Vivian Van. In a quarterfinal match for the newly established Ring of Honor Women's Pure Title Tournament, Billie Starkz will be taking on Olympia. In 6-person tag match, the premier athletes are set to take on a mystery opponent, in which you'll have Arya Davari, Tony Nese, and Story Denali. In a match for the Ring of Honor World Tag Team titles, Rush and Sammy Guevara of La Facción Ingobernables will be defending against the Von Erichs, Marshall and Ross Von Erich. Mina Shirakawa defends the Ring of Honor Interim World Television title against Lacey Lane. And Dralistico with Rush will be taking on Bandito in a proving ground match. If Dralistico can win or last the time limit, he'll earn a shot at Bandito's Ring of Honor World title. So now let's look at tonight's Impact, as it'll be the go-home Impact before tomorrow night's Victory Road pay-per-view. Now, before we do get into that, some news came out today on a story we reported on yesterday, as TNA is conducting an internal investigation based on some allegation that came out against two-time Knockouts World Tag Team Champion and former Knockouts World Champion Masha Slamovich, accusations of domestic abuse against her former partner, Akira. Masha responded, in which she basically kind of acknowledged her, albeit some people didn't accept her apology. She apologized. She did seem to apologize for everything that happened. She acknowledged it. But a lot of people just didn't seem to want to take her seriously. But I guess we'll just wait and see how things pan out there. So with that now, of course, let's talk about what's going to be going down on tonight's Impact, which comes from the Armory in Minneapolis. This is, of course, the go-home Impact before tomorrow night's Victory Road, with, of course, Tom Hannafin and Matthew Rainwalt on commentary. You'll see the opening match will feature Victoria Crawford taking on Jody Threat in a bit of a feud that's been heating up the last couple of weeks on Impact. Leon Slater will team with his Victory Road opponent, Cedric Alexander, as he'll be defending the X Division title, I believe, against him at Victory Road. He'll be taking on the Rascals of Trey Miguel and Zachary Wentz. Of course, I believe Martin Reed will probably be on commentary for that. Then there's a Battle Royal set, as participants in the Battle Royal include Matt Cardona, the hometown man, Rosemary, Ryan Nemeth, Zaya Brookside, Mance Warner, Lei Ying Lee, Killer Kelly, AJ Francis, and Mara Sade. And in the main event, we'll see international champion Steve Maclin team with Mr. Anderson, making his in-ring return to TNA after a few years. Mr. Anderson, everybody would probably remember as Mr. Kennedy from his time in WWE. Take on Frankie Kazarian and Jake Something. So with that being said, that's all I got for the wrestling wrap-up. So now we're going to get ready. So with today being Thursday, September 25th, 2025, let's get ready to take a look back at this day in Niche history. So let's see, 2019, 2000, 2005, and 2001. Okay. So first off, I'm going to head back to the year 2000, 25 years ago today. On this date, 25 years ago today, back in the year 2000, WCW would hold its Monday Nitro event from the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. The show would start off with a stickball bat versus kendo stick match between Big Vito and Johnny the Bull, and in a no contest. In a WCW World Tag Team Title six-way tag team battle royal, Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Haire would outlast 3 Count, Hundu Guerrera, and Rey Mysterio of the Filthy Animals, the Harris Brothers, Misfits in Action duo of Corporal Cajun, Lieutenant Loco, and Sergeant AWOL, and the Drunken Dragons, Jamie San and Kazayashi. And Mike Awesome would defeat the Insane Clown Ozzy in a 2-on-1 match. In a cage heat match, Goldberg would defeat Scott Steiner in just under 5 minutes. Then the main event saw in a cage heat match for the WCW World Heavyweight title, Vince Russo would defeat Booker T to become the WCW World Champion, which a lot of people really frowned down upon that idea at the time. So, anyways, now moving on to the year 2001. And on this date in the year 2001, on this date in the year 2001, Actus is the final episode of the Actus OVA X Driver was released on this date back in 2001. So on this date, 24 years ago today, the final episode of the Actus OVA X Driver was released on this date back in 2001. Then we go with that. Now moving ahead to the year 2005, on this date in 2005, 20 years ago today, American actor and voice actor Don Adams would pass away on this date at the age of 82. Of course, he was known by most fans for a stint as Maxwell Smart in the in the comedy series Get Smart, where he played a bumbling secret agent. Also, in the reason why we're covering him, of course, because he had quite a bit of a notable career in animation as well, lending his voice, of course, to a number of series, including the titular character of Tennessee Tuxedo and Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales, as well as Inspector Gadget in the eponymous Inspector Gadget, Gadget Boy and Gadget Boy and Heather, Principal Hickey in Pepper Ann. Of course, he voiced himself in the new Scooby-Doo movies episode The Exterminator. So on this date, 20 years ago today, American actor and comedian Don Adams passed away at the age of 82. And finally, 6 years ago today, as soon as I grab all that, on this date 6 years ago today, I pull that up. On this date 6 years ago today, back in 2019, Channels over here. Okay, there we go there. On this date, 6 years ago today, back in 2019, the 40th issue of Deadly Class from Image went on sale on this date back in 2019. The story was written by Rick Remender, Wes Craig doing the art, Russ Wooten on lettering, and Jordan Boyd on coloring. All right, with that being said, I hope everybody enjoyed the show tonight. We'll be back here with more Niche News tomorrow, of course. Also, don't forget this Sunday I'll be joined by Rick Piper from Cross Comics, who will be taking another trip down Comics History Lane, as we will be looking back to comics went on sale in June 1940 from Quality Comics. So with that, I thank everybody for being here, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.